part of the reason we're closely watching, because we're approaching the peak of hurricane season. I mean, we're getting into it here, right? I mean, so you would expect something to develop. We're going to get into the unusual nature of what we've seen so far this year. It's been nearly 2 months since we've seen a named tropical system. When you look at the fact that we're getting into, you get the first couple of weeks of September, that leads right up to the peak.
Right, so there's 75% of the season still ahead of us, and that is the lion's share of where we would typically see strong, powerful hurricanes. Now, we've got two different areas that we're keeping our eye on. We've got Invest 91L and a tropical wave that has come off the coast of Africa, and these are not created equally, so to speak, right now, Chris. In fact, Invest 91, this is the one we really need to keep our eye on.
Yeah, but just the fact there's another area to watch is just a reminder that it's that time of year when we get these waves that start coming off of Africa. They don't all make it to the U.S., but the more waves there are, the more chances eventually there could be some interaction with land.
Absolutely. So we want to bring in our hurricane expert, Dr. Rick Knabb, to talk a little bit more about this. And Dr. Knabb, I know you're not ready to say the U.S. is off the hook here altogether.
No, absolutely not. With a slow mover like that, still way out in the central tropical Atlantic, you can't be sure that that is going to miss. And I want to remind everybody what a major hurricane looks like. This is actually out in the Pacific. This is a super typhoon, a Cat 4 equivalent. But this is in the part of the world out in the Indian Ocean and the maritime continent, West Pacific, that is the active up part of the world. But the rest of the Pacific and most of the Atlantic, Chris, has been convectively suppressed. So that pattern is kind of stuck, and we don't really know when it's going to start moving or if the Atlantic will just overcome that.
There is a relationship there, though, isn't there? Some part of the world being active, other part of the world not being as active.
Yeah, and a lot of times that activity moves around the world. So different basins around the world go through a couple weeks of activity and then inactivity, and it moves around, but we've been stuck.
And this is more than just a little, wow, that's interesting. This is kind of a big deal how quiet it's been, right?
It really is getting to be significant. And even these systems have their issues. You know, it's not like a slam dunk that these are going to develop and become really, really strong. So now, here we are, the latest starting Augusts in the active era since 1995. We've surpassed all of them except 1997, which is the only year in the active era without an August storm.
But that was a unique year, too, right?
Yeah.
You weren't expecting a busy season that year,
no,
right?
Because 1997 was an El Nino year. But the one before that, with 0 storms in August, was 1961. That was a neutral year. It wasn't La Nina or El Nino. Again, El Nino years, warm waters in the Pacific tend to lessen hurricane activity. So that was a neutral year. But all these other years in the past, when we don't have satellites, we don't really know how many storms there were. But the point is, we don't have a known La Nina year like this year with no August storms. So this is somewhat historic. Right.
So it's not just the fact that we've gone a long time. We've gone a long time in a La Nina year. Yeah. And it's supposed to be a busy year.
Yeah. So, and think of all the data we have to find little tropical storms out there. There has not been one, right? Now, those years, here's 1997, the only year in the satellite era with 0 August storms. This was an El Nino year. But 1961, again, before we had satellites, but we still have a pretty good idea of where the storms were. 1 storm in July. So by this date, we had 1 named storm. You know what we had the second half of the season? 7 more hurricanes and 5 majors. So you can't count out a hurricane season at halftime.
And that's without satellites. You're relying on ships and other things.
And landfalls.
Yeah, and landfalls, yeah.
Right. And then we've talked about 2013, which was the most recent year where we expected an above-average year, and it didn't happen. And notice, 1 hurricane in the western half of the basin, 1 hurricane in the eastern half, and calm and suppressed in the middle, and that's what this year's kind of behaving like. So we don't know which year this is going to end up being like when the second half story is written. Right,
because that's the other thing. The first half of any given season is not always a predictor of the second half of any given season.
We got 3 long, potentially long months to go. Now, this one is going to be around a while, Chris. This is moving slowly off to the west-northwest. 8 out of 10 shots still from the Hurricane Center. Yes, we have an upper-level low that has been producing some wind shear, bringing some dry air in. But look at how you're starting to get upper level high pressure outflow starting to form. And this is the most thunderstorm activity we've seen in the central tropical Atlantic all season long. So this is worth keeping our eye on.
And the fact that you said it's moving slow, there's some time, how does that factor into things?
Well, a couple of things. It gives it more time to develop and strengthen over the warm waters, but it also gives it more time to catch a trough out of town and miss the continental U.S. But it's going toward warmer waters. There's no doubt about that. It's going to head to this part of the basin north of the Caribbean, unlike this eastern Atlantic system that is going to go toward cooler water. So this one doesn't look like it has a long life. But if we look at the models, we've got to pay attention to this guy. Now, this is in the Euro model. You see the colors going slowly northwestward. 5 days from now, it's still at the longitude of Puerto Rico. But then it gets under that ridge. But where is it when the next trough comes in? Does it get it right out of town or not?
That's the big question.
That is.
But first, we've got to see if we have something in the days to come.
First things first.
A lot to watch here on Storm Center.